At 6:11 on Friday evening, I collapsed on my kitchen floor as my Apple Watch prepared to call for help. My daughter-in-law saw me, then walked away laughing on FaceTime with her mother. Minutes later, my son said, "Don't call 911 yet. Wait until I get home." I stayed silent and listened. 8 weeks later, they entered my living room, believing I had lost my mind until I pressed play. Before we dive in, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to pretend to be someone you're not to protect yourself? Yes or no? Your honesty means more than you know. Quick note, some details in this story are fictionalized for narrative depth. The lesson at its core is what I hope resonates with you. On July 15th at 6:11 in the evening, I collapsed on my kitchen floor while my daughter-in-law laughed into her phone in the next room. But to understand how a mother ends up there, you need to know about the watch on my wrist and the 3 quiet months that came before. 3 weeks earlier on a Friday morning in late June, I woke at 5:30 the way I always did, not because I had anywhere urgent to be, but because 30 years of teaching second grade had trained my body to rise before the sun. At 68 years old, I still wore the Apple Watch my cardiologist insisted on, a small silver guardian, tracking every heartbeat in the quiet suburban house I'd lived in for 35 years. The watch sat snug against my wrist as I padded into the kitchen, the Florida morning already warm through the windows, and I made coffee the way I'd made it for decades, strong, dark, no sugar. The watch vibrated gently at 6:03, reminding me to stand and move. I smiled at it the way you smile at a faithful dog. Dr. Whitfield had been firm when he'd prescribed it 2 years ago. Irene at 68 with hypertension, "This watch isn't optional, it's insurance." I'd told him I'd wear it. I didn't tell him it would become the only witness to what happened next. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet when you live alone. Desmond had installed a small camera above the kitchen cabinets and another by the front door 2 years earlier, after a string of neighborhood break-ins for your safety, Mom, and I'd never thought twice about either one. My husband had been gone 7 years. The silence didn't bother me anymore. I'd learned to fill it with small routines, morning coffee and crossword puzzles, and the ceiling fan turning slow circles overhead. I had my retirement, my pension from teaching, my paid-off mortgage, and a life I'd built carefully around comfort and predictability. I thought I was managing just fine. Sunday afternoons my son visited. Desmond arrived every Sunday at exactly 2 o'clock punctual as a creditor. He was 40 years old with his father's height but none of his integrity, though I wouldn't have said that out loud 3 months ago. Back then I was still grateful for the visits. He'd bring Roxanne, my daughter-in-law of 3 years, who arrived in her usual cloud of designer perfume, 37 years old, and carrying a handbag that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "You're managing okay out here alone, right, Mom?" Desmond would ask, standing in my living room with his phone in one hand, his eyes scanning the vintage furniture, the corner cabinet, the framed photos on the mantel. "It's a lot of house for one person." "I manage fine, I'd say offering tea. We just worry about you, that's all," Roxanne would add, perching on the edge of my sofa like she was afraid the upholstery might stain her clothes. "At your age, things can happen so fast." I taught children for 30 years. I know when someone is looking at something they want to possess. But what do you do when the thing they're appraising is your own home, and you're the obstacle standing between them and ownership? I smiled and poured tea and told myself they cared. But there were signs, small things. The kind of details a teacher notices because teachers are trained to watch for patterns for the moment a child's behavior shifts from normal to concerning. In April, my blood pressure medication disappeared. I searched everywhere: the bathroom cabinet, the kitchen counter, my bedroom nightstand. I was certain I'd just refilled the prescription. A week later, Roxanne found it tucked behind the cereal boxes in the pantry. "Found it behind the cereal, Mom," she'd said, holding up the orange bottle with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You really should be more careful." I'd thanked her, feeling foolish, wondering if I was losing track of things the way older people do. In May, Roxanne mentioned assisted living facilities, casual light, like she was discussing vacation destinations. She'd even brought a brochure, glossy photos of smiling elderly people in pristine common rooms, staff in crisp uniforms, promises of comprehensive care and peace of mind for families. "Just something to think about," she'd said, "for down the road, you know, eventually." I'd set the brochure on the counter and forgotten about it. Or tried to. In early June, Desmond asked to borrow my property deed. "Just need to make a photocopy for the bank," he'd explained, voice easy and casual. "You know how mortgages are. They want comparisons for the loan I'm applying for. I'll bring it back tomorrow." I'd handed it over without a second thought. He was my son. Why would I question him? You want to believe the best in your children. You have to. Because the alternative that they might see you as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved is a truth no mother wants to face alone. But looking back now from the other side of everything that happened, I can see what I refused to see then. The medication wasn't misplaced. The nursing home brochure wasn't casual conversation. The property deed wasn't borrowed for a bank comparison. They were preparing. Not for 3 weeks from now, not for 3 months. They'd been planning for longer than that, laying groundwork, testing boundaries, watching to see if I'd notice. And I hadn't. Or I had, and I'd chosen to explain it away, because acknowledging the truth would have meant admitting that the son I'd raised, the boy I'd taught to tie his shoes and read his first book, had grown into someone capable of looking at his own mother and seeing nothing but an asset to liquidate. I ignored every single sign. Not because I was foolish, not because I was old. I ignored them because I was a mother who couldn't yet imagine her own child counting down the days until her house became his. Until the day the little watch on my wrist began recording things that no one, least of all my son, ever wanted me to know. 3 weeks later at 6:11 on a Friday evening, everything I'd refused to see would become impossible to ignore. That Friday came 3 weeks later exactly as ordinary Fridays do, with no warning bells, no premonition, just the quiet routine of an evening alone. I was in the kitchen at 6:11, chopping vegetables for dinner, when the lightheadedness started. It felt like the floor had tilted. I gripped the edge of the counter, the knife still in my other hand, and tried to breathe through the dizziness. My Apple Watch vibrated twice against my wrist, a gentle pulse I'd felt 100 times before. But this time, when I glanced down at the screen, the numbers were wrong. Heart rate 147. Abnormal. The automated voice was calm, almost soothing. Abnormal heart rate detected. Emergency services will be contacted in 60 seconds unless you respond. I tried to tap the screen to dismiss it. My fingers wouldn't cooperate. And then the kitchen floor rose up to meet me, cold linoleum against my cheek. My right arm pinned beneath me, the ceiling fan spinning slow circles above, while my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to break free. I heard Roxanne's footsteps in the hallway. She'd been in the living room when I started cooking. I'd heard her voice earlier, bright and animated, talking to someone on the phone. Now her footsteps came closer, the sharp click of heels on tile, maybe 5 feet from the kitchen door. The footsteps stopped. I heard her pause. A moment of absolute silence. And then I heard the footsteps turn deliberately away back toward the living room, the sound growing fainter until the living room door clicked shut. My watch vibrated again. 6:17. Emergency services will be contacted now. No one came. From the living room, I heard Roxanne's voice resume louder now, carrying through the thin wall that separated us. Mom, you still there? Sorry, I thought I heard something. She wasn't talking to me. She was on FaceTime. I had never met Norma Farrell in person, but I knew her voice sharp and commanding even through a phone speaker, 62 years of calculated decisions compressed into every syllable. Roxanne's mother. The woman who'd raised my daughter-in-law to measure everything in terms of acquisition and status. I'm here, Norma's voice said. So tell me about this Hermes bag you're looking at. The Birkin or the Kelly? The Kelly, I think. In that cognac leather, it's perfect for spring. And Paris. Have you booked the hotel yet? Not yet. I'm deciding between the Plaza Athénée and that boutique place near the Marais you mentioned. I lay on the floor, my cheek pressed against the cold tile, listening to my daughter-in-law discuss luxury handbags and European vacations while my heart tried to kill me 30 feet away. 54 minutes. That's how long a human body can lie on a kitchen floor, waiting for help that isn't coming. That's also exactly how long it takes to understand who your children really are. At 6:45, I heard a different tone, the distinctive chime of an incoming FaceTime call. Roxanne answered immediately. Hey, babe, she said, her voice shifting to something softer, more intimate. Desmond, how's everything there? My son's voice clear and close. He must have been looking at the screen because after a brief pause, his tone changed. Sharp, deliberate. Don't call yet. I can see her on the floor behind you. Wait until I get home. Then we'll figure it out. The room went very quiet. Then Roxanne's voice careful and measured. Okay, yeah, I'll wait. The conversation shifted back to Paris, to hotels, to weather predictions for spring. My son had seen me collapsed on the floor through his phone screen and had given a direct order to delay calling for help. Not an assumption, not a misunderstanding, a choice. I memorized every word they said after that. Every restaurant Norma recommended, every museum Roxanne wanted to visit, every detail of the life they were planning with money they were already spending in their heads. My money, my house, my 35 years of mortgage payments converted into cognac leather and boutique hotels. At 7:05, Roxanne finally dialed 911. The ambulance arrived at 7:18. By 7:30, I was in the emergency room at Broward Health Medical Center. Harsh white lights overhead, the steady beep of monitors tracking the heart that had nearly given out. Dr. Conrad Whitfield stabilized me. He was 52 and compact, with the economical movements of 2 decades in emergency medicine, and he stood beside my hospital bed with an expression I recognized from 30 years of teaching, the look of someone who knows a student is lying. Desmond had arrived before the ambulance left, playing the part of the worried son with impressive conviction. Now he stood at the foot of my bed, phone in hand, face arranged in careful concern. The window of oxygen deprivation doesn't align with when the call was placed. Dr. Whitfield said, his voice careful and measured. Can you walk me through exactly when you found her? She was already down when Roxanne called me, Desmond stammered. I got here as fast as... When she wakes up, have her call me. Directly. Dr. Whitfield cut him off, setting a business card on the bedside table with deliberate emphasis. Not in my hand, not with my son, on the table where I could see it, but Desmond might miss it. He knew. After the doctor left, I lay perfectly still, eyes closed, listening. Desmond moved closer to Roxanne, his voice dropping to a whisper I could barely hear. The doctor is suspicious. Shut up. Just keep acting worried. I made my decision in that moment. My son thought his mother had lost her mind or would lose it soon enough, damaged by oxygen deprivation and age and the convenient narrative they were already building. I would let him go, right on thinking that. I taught second graders for 30 years. I know exactly how to wait perfectly still and patient for the cheating student to expose themselves completely. I know how to watch, without seeming to watch, how to gather evidence while appearing oblivious, how to let the guilty party believe they've gotten away with it right up until the moment you prove they haven't. The only difference was that this time the student was my own son, and the test was my life. 3 days later, Desmond would visit the hospital alone, and he would take something he thought I'd never notice. But I would notice, because I was watching. I was always watching. 3 days after I woke up in that hospital bed, my son came to visit me alone. No flowers, no fruit basket, just his phone in one hand, and a look in his eyes I'd seen before on children about to steal from the classroom supply closet. The test began that afternoon. Desmond arrived at 2:30 carrying nothing. He pulled the visitor chair close, sat down, and stared at his phone. Just checking in, Mom. The doctors say you're doing better. I kept my eyes half closed, breathing slow and even. Through my lashes, I watched him thumb-scrolling, knee-bouncing gaze drifting to the bedside table. He stayed exactly 10 minutes. At 2:47, he stood and moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. His hand reached for the bedside drawer with careful deliberation. The drawer slid open. Inside reading glasses, a paperback, the bag of personal effects from the ambulance, my phone wallet, wedding ring, and my house keys. His hand hovered. That fraction of a second hesitation I'd seen 1,000 times in second graders about to steal, knowing it was wrong, deciding the risk was worth it. His fingers closed around the keyring, soft jingle of metal muffled by his palm. One smooth motion into his jacket pocket. I'll be back tomorrow, Mom. The door clicked shut. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. 2:47 p.m. bedside drawer, house keys including the small brass key to my bedroom safe. He took them because he needed to open something specific. That afternoon, Bernard Townsend knocked softly on the doorframe, my 71-year-old neighbor, who'd delivered mail for 30 years before retiring, holding a thermos of coffee and a worried expression. Irene, I heard what happened. Thought you might want real coffee. I beckoned him closer, waited until his weathered face was inches from mine. Bernard, I need you to do something and not ask why until later. He nodded. Go to my house. Back gate code is 7245. Check the wall safe behind my bedroom dresser. See if it's been opened. Then call this number. I recited Florence Ingram's number from memory. Ask for Florence Ingram. Tell her I have not lost my mind. Bernard squeezed my hand once and left. 2 days later, he returned with grief in his eyes. Irene, the safe was open. Your husband's wedding ring, it's gone. I didn't cry. I stared at the ceiling and felt something cold settle in my chest. My husband wore that ring for 32 years. I placed it in the safe the day he passed, intending to keep it until the day I joined him. My son took it 4 days after I was hospitalized. Not to remember his father. To sell him. Thank you, I told Bernard. Now we play this game to the end. They discharged me 11 days later. Desmond drove me home, carried my bag, checked groceries and medications. He didn't mention the safe. He didn't mention the ring. The first week home, I performed carefully. Slow responses, confused expressions, left cabinet doors open, misplaced my glasses in his presence, called him by his father's name twice. He watched with an expression that might have been concern if you didn't know what to look for. But I knew. I'd seen that look on students who'd cheated and were waiting to see if I'd noticed. On the 18th morning, I woke before dawn and went to the backyard garden. Cool air scent of jasmine. I sat on the wooden bench my husband built 20 years ago and waited. At 6:15, the back gate opened. Florence Ingram slipped through Bernard's yard into mine 67 with silver haircut, practical and short, who'd taught English across the hall from my second grade classroom for 15 years before going to law school at 50. Now she practiced elder law with the precision of someone who'd graded 10,000 essays. She sat beside me, set her briefcase between us. Bernard told me everything. I've been doing research. She pulled out a yellow legal pad. I need to ask you something critical. Your Apple Watch does it sync data to the cloud automatically? Yes. My cardiologist set it up 2 years ago. Everything uploads heart rate, activity, sleep patterns. How do you build a case against your own child? The same way you grade a plagiarized essay, one provable fact at a time until the truth is undeniable. Florence leaned forward, eyes intense behind her reading glasses. Irene, that little watch recorded everything. The exact timeline. The abnormal heart rate at 6:13 p.m. The emergency SOS at 6:17. Every minute you lay on that floor, those records cannot be altered or deleted by anyone. They're stored on Apple's servers with timestamps verified by cellular carrier logs. That data will hold up in any court in Florida. Something shifted in my chest, not hope, something harder. How long do we have? 3 to 4 weeks before they can file for guardianship. They'll need medical documentation of cognitive decline, wellness checks, memory tests. You'll need to fail them convincingly while I build the counter case. I'll need the exact time Desmond took your keys, the date the ring disappeared, copies of your financial records. And you'll need to keep performing this role perfectly confused enough to convince them lucid enough to document everything. She smiled, thin and sharp. We move fast, and we move in absolute secrecy. If they suspect you're gathering evidence, they'll accelerate. File emergency guardianship. Lock you out of your accounts before you can fight back. The sun was rising, painting the garden gold and coral. My phone would ring soon. Desmond's morning check-in call. Florence stood, tucked her legal pad away. That little watch on your wrist recorded everything, Irene. Every second, every heartbeat, every minute you were alone. She squeezed my shoulder. For the first time since lying on that kitchen floor, you're not fighting this battle by yourself. After she left, I sat in the garden and felt the weight of the watch against my wrist. A medical device I'd worn because my cardiologist insisted, because heart disease ran in my family, because I was 68 and living alone. I'd thought of it as a precaution against dying quietly in my sleep. Instead, it had become a witness. But first, I had to convince my son I'd truly lost my mind, and that performance would begin the moment he walked through my door. My son asked me to name my daughter-in-law, and I looked at Roxanne for a long, careful moment, the way a student pretends to struggle with an answer they know perfectly well before saying the wrong name, and watching her face light up like a child who'd just gotten away with cheating. The performance began the moment they walked through my door. Desmond arrived on a Wednesday afternoon with Roxanne beside him, both wearing expressions of concern that would have been convincing if I hadn't known better. He settled into the armchair across from me, pulled out a notebook and spoke in that slow, loud voice people use with children. Mom, we just want to check how you're doing. A few simple questions, okay? I blinked slowly, let my hands rest in my lap. Do you remember what day it is? I looked toward the window. It's summer. The light looks like summer. Desmond wrote something down. And do you remember what happened while you were in the hospital? I think I fell, or maybe I was sick. Roxanne shifted in her seat, watching me with the intensity of someone checking if a performance was convincing enough. Desmond leaned forward. Mom, do you know who this woman is? This is Roxanne, your daughter-in-law. Can you say her name? I looked at Roxanne, let the silence stretch. 10 full seconds of manufactured confusion. Rose, I said finally, letting my eyes drift slightly unfocused. Rosemary, I had a student once named Rosemary. Roxanne turned to Desmond, and her voice dropped to a whisper that wasn't quite quiet enough. Perfect. It's done. The doctor was right. The cognitive decline is progressing. Something cold and satisfied settled in my chest. They believed it. They genuinely believed I'd lost my mind, and that certainty made them careless. Desmond asked more questions. my address, my birthday, how long I'd taught school. I answered some correctly fumbled. Others deliberately watched them document every mistake with the focused attention of people building a case. After they left, I sat in the silent house and counted to 60. Then I walked to the kitchen. 3 times in the past 2 weeks, my medication had disappeared. 3 times I'd searched everywhere, convinced I'd misplaced the bottles. 3 times Desmond had found them in the refrigerator, the linen closet behind cleaning supplies. "You're getting confused, Mom," he'd said each time. "Maybe we should set up a pill organizer." I opened the bottom kitchen drawer, moved aside the dish towels, reached behind the box of pasta. I never cooked the one that had been sitting in the same spot for 6 months. 3 prescription bottles, heart medication, blood pressure medication, beta blockers. All 3 lined up carefully in the shadows where I would never think to look. Not forgotten, deliberately concealed. I photographed the bottles exactly where they sat, made sure the timestamp showed. Then I called Florence. I found my medication, all 3 bottles, hidden behind a pasta box in the bottom kitchen drawer. Silence. Then Florence's voice tight with controlled anger. "Don't move them yet. This isn't forgetfulness on your part, Irene. This is felony elder abuse. In Florida, intentionally withholding necessary medication from a vulnerable adult carries up to 15 years. I stared at the 3 bottles, thinking about the 3 times I'd blamed myself, the 3 times I'd apologized to Desmond for being confused, the 3 times I'd felt my mind slipping and wondered if he was right. They were building the case against me using my own fear. They were, Florence agreed, and now we're building one against them. "Can you come to my office Friday?" Friday morning, I sat in Florence's law office while Valerie Dunn opened her laptop. Valerie was 48 and carrying a laptop bag that looked more organized than most people's lives. She specialized in following money trails that people thought they'd hidden, and she'd just found every single one of mine. The activity started 6 months ago. Valerie turned the screen toward me, a spreadsheet filled with transactions highlighted in yellow. "A secondary debit card was issued on your account in Roxanne's name. No signature authorization from you. Small withdrawals, $180, $215, $350, nothing large enough to trigger fraud alerts." I watched the numbers scroll past. Grocery stores, gas stations, ATMs, total withdrawn $8,400, all deposited into one account. Norma Farrell, Roxanne's mother. When someone you love steals from you, the betrayal isn't in the money itself. It's in the calculation, the planning, the 6 months of smiling at you while routing your savings to their mother's account transaction by transaction like you were already dead. Florence slid a stack of printed emails across the desk. "Valerie found these in Desmond's cloud backup, all sent in April, 3 months before you collapsed." She pointed to the subject lines. "Nursing home inquiries, placement availability, cost estimates for memory care units." He contacted 3 different facilities. He was building documentation of your supposed incapacity before it even happened. I picked up the top email. Read Desmond's words asking about accommodations for an elderly parent with declining cognitive function. Asking about involuntary commitment procedures. And this. Florence pulled out one more document. Forged healthcare proxy, filed with Broward Health Medical Center the day after you were admitted. Your signature, except it's not your signature. I compared it to your actual documents. The pieces assembled themselves. 6 months of financial fraud, 3 months of nursing home research, forged legal documents, medication deliberately hidden, and finally 54 minutes on a kitchen floor while my son watched through a phone screen and decided to wait. "How much time do we have?" Florence closed her laptop and looked at me with the focused intensity of a woman who'd won every case she'd ever taken to trial. "Your son just retained private counsel. The guardianship petition will be filed within the month. We have exactly 3 weeks to move before they do." I thought about Desmond sitting in my living room testing my memory, believing he'd won. Teachers learn patience, but we also learn timing. The ring my husband wore for 32 years was still out there somewhere, and I intended to find it. Florence called at 7 in the morning to tell me she'd found my husband's wedding ring, and for the first time since the hospital, I cried not from relief, but from the ice-cold certainty of what I was going to do with it. I was sitting in the backyard garden when my phone rang, the place where Florence and I had first met in secret, where the jasmine still bloomed and the wooden bench still held the weight of every decision I'd made since lying on that kitchen floor. "I found it," Florence said without preamble. "A pawn shop on Oakland Park Boulevard, 12 miles from your house." I pressed the phone harder against my ear. "He sold it on July 19th, 4 days after you were admitted, Irene. 4 days. The number hit me like a fist. Not weeks later. Not months. 4 days after I nearly died, my son walked into a pawn shop and sold his father's wedding ring. I paid the redemption fee, Florence continued. The ring is back, but that's not all I got. What else? Security footage. The pawn shop keeps everything time-stamped and archived. The video shows Desmond clearly walked in at 2:40 p.m. on July 19th, handed over the ring, took $340 cash, and walked out. The timestamp is undeniable. The transaction is documented. He signed the receipt. I sat very still on the wooden bench, feeling the morning sun on my face and something cold crystallizing in my chest. $340, I repeated. That's what your husband's wedding ring was worth to him. Less than the cost of a cheap flight to Miami. I thought about the ring, the simple gold band my husband had worn every day for 32 years. Through raising a child, through building a life, through every promise kept, and every ordinary morning. He'd worn it the day he taught Desmond to ride a bike, the day we celebrated our silver anniversary, the day the cancer diagnosis came back, the last day he was conscious. I'd placed it in the safe the afternoon he died, intending to keep it until the day I joined him. My son took it 4 days after I was hospitalized and sold it for $340. My husband wore that ring for 32 years. 32 years of holding my hand of promises kept of a life we built one day at a time. My son sold it for $340, 4 days after I nearly died. 4 days. Irene, Florence's voice pulled me back. Are you okay? Bring me that ring, I said quietly. I want it for the day we end this, not to remember my husband. He doesn't need a ring for me to remember him. I want it because my son needs to see exactly what he thought was worth $340. Florence was silent for a moment. I'll bring it tomorrow. And the footage? Already burned to 3 separate drives. Time-stamped, authenticated, chain of custody documented. If this goes to court, that video will be Exhibit A. Masa Masad. After we hung up, I sat in the garden for a long time, thinking about what it means to really know someone. To spend 35 years believing you raised a decent human being, only to discover you raised someone capable of selling his father's wedding ring while his mother lay in a hospital bed, recovering from the night he'd watched her collapse and decided to wait. Before I reveal the detail that changes everything, drop the number 54 in the comments for the 54 minutes I lay on that floor. Please note, upcoming events contain fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes. If this makes you uncomfortable, you can stop here. 3 days later, Bernard knocked on my back gate at dusk. Irene, I need to show you something, he said, settling into the patio chair across from me. I've been thinking about the night you collapsed, July 15th, and I remembered something. What? He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his photos. I heard a heavy thud around 6:30 that evening. Thought you were moving furniture. I knocked on your front door to check if you needed help, no answer. Waited about 2 minutes, then left. I was on the kitchen floor by then, I said quietly. I know. But before I left your porch, I took this. He turned the phone toward me. I document property issues for the HOA loose steps peeling paint mailbox damage. Time-stamped photos for the records. I took this at 6:31 p.m. right before I walked away. I had no idea you were inside dying. I looked at the screen. The photo showed my front porch, the welcome mat, the potted geraniums, and beyond the window through the glass lights. Every light in the house blazing bright against the early evening darkness. The lights are on, I whispered. All of them. Look closer. Bernard zoomed in on the living room window. There behind the curtain, a silhouette, unmistakable, a person standing in my living room at 6:31 p.m. Not still, not frozen, moving. The silhouette in Bernard's photo wasn't still. It wasn't frozen in panic or shock or fear. It was moving. She was walking, living her normal life while I was dying on the floor 30 feet away. At 6:31, Roxanne was walking around your house like it was a normal evening, Bernard said, his voice tight with controlled anger. The emergency call wasn't placed until 7:05. That's 34 minutes after this photo, Irene. 34 minutes. I stared at the image, at the proof that my daughter-in-law had been actively moving through my house while I lay on the kitchen floor, not paralyzed by fear, not frozen in indecision, walking, going about her evening, maybe checking her phone, maybe thinking about Paris hotels and cognac leather handbags. Can you send me that photo? Already sent it to Florence with the full metadata. Timestamp, GPS coordinates, camera model, everything. This photo proves someone was awake, alert, and mobile in your house at 6:31 p.m. Combined with the 911 call at 7:05, it establishes a documented 34-minute window of deliberate inaction. After Bernard left, I sat in the darkening garden and thought about timing, about how long it takes to dial 3 numbers, about how short 34 minutes actually is when you're deciding what to have for dinner, and about how very long it is when you're the one waiting to die. What I didn't know yet was that the kitchen camera had captured something even they thought was erased forever. Florence arrived at my back gate at dawn, carrying a laptop and news that made me believe for the first time that God pays attention to the details criminals think no one sees. The kitchen camera hadn't recorded anything the night I collapsed. They'd made certain of that, but Florence had found something better. "Come sit," she said, settling at the garden table, opening her laptop. The screen cast blue light across her face in the early morning darkness. "I need to show you what we found." I sat across from her, my coffee cup warm between my hands. "The kitchen camera was covered," Florence began. "A dish towel, placed there 8 days before you collapsed. Very deliberate, very careful. They thought they'd created a blind spot. But they forgot about physics." She turned the laptop toward me. The screen showed a still image from my front door security camera, the view looking down my hallway toward the kitchen. "See that glass panel on your kitchen door? The one between the kitchen and the hallway." I looked. The decorative glass panel I'd chosen 15 years ago because it let light through while maintaining some privacy. "I see it." Florence tapped the screen. That glass caught a reflection. The front door camera recorded it, and my forensics expert spent 3 days mapping the movement patterns from the reflection. She clicked through a series of enhanced images. The glass panel, normally just a background detail, had been isolated and magnified, and in the reflection blurred but unmistakable a figure moving. "These timestamps run from 6:11 to 7:10 p.m. on July 15th. Florence's voice was steady, precise. "Look at the movement, back and forth, kitchen to living room to kitchen, normal walking pace, not someone frozen in panic, not someone paralyzed by shock, normal movement." I stared at the mapped paths, the digital trail of someone going about their evening, while I lay on the floor 30 feet away. "They covered the lens," I said quietly. "But they forgot that light doesn't ask permission." "Exactly." Florence pulled up another file. "Light reflects. Records. Tells the truth whether anyone wants it to or not. They thought covering one camera would erase the evidence. They didn't account for a reflection in a piece of decorative glass, catching every movement they made. They tried to erase the crime by covering a camera lens, but light is stubborn. Light doesn't care about human plans. It bounces off glass, reflects into unexpected places. Records what happened whether anyone intended it to or not. They forgot physics. Physics didn't forget them. "Can this be used in court?" I asked. "Already authenticated by 2 separate forensic experts. The timestamps are verified. The reflection analysis is scientifically sound. And combined with Bernard's photo showing the moving silhouette, we have 2 independent sources proving continuous movement throughout the entire window of abandonment." I looked at the laptop screen at the ghostly figure reflected in glass and felt something settle deep in my chest. Not hope, something harder, certainty. "There's more," Florence said. 3 weeks later, I sat in Florence's law office while she laid a document on the desk between us. "This is the guardianship petition Desmond filed yesterday. It cites progressive cognitive impairment, inability to manage your own affairs, and danger to yourself if left unsupervised." I looked at the official court filing at my son's name signed at the bottom. And attached to the petition, Florence slid another document across the desk. "Is this a financial power of attorney, dated May 12th, 2 months before you collapsed. It bears your signature and grants Desmond complete control over your accounts and assets." I stared at the signature, my name, but not my hand. "Except it's not your signature," Florence continued. "I hired a forensic handwriting expert, Valerie." Valerie Dunn opened her laptop, pulled up a side-by-side comparison. My actual signature from bank documents, the signature on the power of attorney, and between them, a detailed forensic overlay showing stroke mechanics, pressure points, letter formation. "The stroke mechanics are completely wrong," Valerie said, pointing at the screen. "Your actual signature moves left to right with decreasing pressure as your hand completes each letter. This forgery moves right to left with increasing pressure. The person who wrote this was moving their hand in the opposite direction from how you naturally write." She zoomed in on specific letters. "Look at the capital C in Caldwell. Your authentic signature forms the curve in one smooth motion. The forgery shows 3 distinct stops here, here, and here. Someone was copying the shape without understanding the motion that creates it. How many times had I watched a child forge a parent's signature on a failed test? How many times had I known instantly from the way the pen moved wrong, the pressure distributed incorrectly, my son thought I wouldn't notice? He forgot who taught him to write his own name. Under Florida law, Florence said, forging a power of attorney is aggravated forgery. 3rd-degree felony, maximum 5 years in state prison. When is the court hearing? I asked. 3 weeks, September 23rd. I looked at the forged document again. My name written in someone else's hand. Every stroke wrong, every letter a lie. I don't want to fight this in court, Florence said. Or rather, I don't want our first move to be in court. I want to invite Desmond to a family meeting. Your house, your witnesses, your evidence. Let him walk in thinking he's about to convince everyone you're incompetent. And instead, he walks into a room where every lie he's told is waiting for him on a screen. Who would be there? You, me, Bernard as a witness, Valerie to present the forensic evidence, and anyone else you trust who should see the truth. I thought about it. About my living room, about my son walking through the door, confident and prepared, carrying his lawyer and his forged documents and his calculated abandonment. Do it, I said. Florence nodded once. 2 days before the hearing, I'll make the calls. I looked at the forged signature, my name written in someone else's hand, pressure wrong, rhythm wrong, everything wrong, and thought about 30 years of grading essays, catching plagiarism, spotting lies. My son signed my name on a legal document. A teacher for 30 years knows the difference between authentic work and a cheap imitation. And this wasn't even a good imitation. 3 weeks until this hearing, which meant 3 weeks to prepare the room, gather the witnesses, and make absolutely certain that when my son walked through that door 2 days ahead of the court date, he was counting on he walked into a truth he couldn't escape. The morning my son walked into my living room to prove I'd lost my mind, I was sitting in my favorite chair with my hands folded in my lap and my eyes slightly unfocused, exactly the way a woman with dementia would sit if that woman actually had dementia. 3 weeks had been exactly enough time. Time to rearrange the furniture. Time to connect the massive flat-screen TV to Florence's laptop. Time to arrange the chairs theater-style facing the screen. Time to make sure every witness knew their role and understood the moment they'd walked into. At 1:30 that afternoon, Dr. Whitfield arrived through the back gate. Florence came next, carrying her briefcase and 3 backup drives. Valerie Dunn set up her laptop on the side table. Bernard Townsend took a seat in the back row. His weathered hands folded, his expression carefully neutral. They looked to anyone walking in like social workers, case managers, medical consultants, the kind of people who attend competency evaluations and nod sympathetically while families make difficult decisions about elderly parents. That was exactly the point. At 2 o'clock, the front doorbell rang. I let my head tilt slightly to the side, let my gaze drift toward the window without quite focusing. Florence walked to the door, playing her role as the concerned family friend, helping to coordinate this difficult meeting. Desmond walked in first. He wore a navy suit, crisp white shirt, confidence radiating from every step. Behind him came a man in his early 50s, carrying a leather briefcase. Gregory Marsh, the private attorney Desmond had retained, expensive and polished and completely unprepared for what he'd walked into. Desmond's eyes swept the room, took in the people seated along the back wall, Dr. Whitfield in his hospital credentials, Florence with her legal pad, Valerie with her laptop, Bernard in his careful neutrality. And he smiled. He actually smiled because he thought they were here to support him, thought they were witnesses to his mother's decline, thought Florence had assembled a panel of professionals to document the sad necessity of guardianship. He had no idea they were my witnesses. "Thank you all for coming," Desmond said, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. "I know this is difficult, but I think we can all agree that what matters most is my mother's safety and well-being." The doorbell rang again. Roxanne entered Norma Farrell close behind her. They took seats near Desmond, forming a unified front, the concerned family, the reluctant decision-makers, the people who would shoulder the burden of caring for someone who could no longer care for herself. I sat in my armchair and let my hands tremble slightly in my lap. "Mom," Desmond said, his voice slow and loud the way you'd speak to a child, "do you know why we're all here today?" I looked at him with carefully manufactured confusion. Let my mouth open slightly, then close. Let silence stretch. "It's okay," he said, turning to address the room. "As the medical records will show, my mother has experienced significant cognitive decline over the past several months. She can no longer recognize basic family members. She forgets conversations within minutes. She requires constant supervision for her own safety. Gregory Marsh pulled documents from his briefcase, medical evaluations, incident reports, the forged power of attorney. "We have documentation," Desmond continued, "of multiple episodes where Mrs. Caldwell has demonstrated clear inability to manage her own affairs, misplaced medications, confusion about dates and times, failure to recognize her own daughter-in-law. I had taught second graders for 30 years. I knew exactly how to sit still, look confused, and wait for the classroom bully to expose themselves completely before the teacher intervened. The only difference was that this time I was both the victim and the teacher, and the test was almost over." Desmond walked through his presentation with absolute conviction. The supposed memory lapses, the manufactured confusion, the carefully documented decline that he and Roxanne had spent 8 weeks building one planted pill bottle and one feigned conversation at a time. "I've consulted with multiple medical professionals," he said, gesturing toward Dr. Whitfield, who sat perfectly still in the back row. "The consensus is clear. My mother needs full-time care in a supervised facility, and as her son, I'm prepared to take on the legal responsibility of managing her affairs through a formal guardianship arrangement." Roxanne nodded, her face arranged in appropriate sadness. Norma Farrell touched her daughter's arm in a gesture of support. "I take no pleasure in this," Desmond said, his voice heavy with false regret. "But as her only son, I have a responsibility to ensure she receives the care she needs." He looked around the room. At the witnesses, he thought agreed with him. At the professionals, he thought supported his case. At his mother sitting confused and helpless in her armchair. "As you can all clearly see, my mother is simply no longer capable of looking after herself." The room fell silent. He said those words, "My mother can no longer care for herself," with the confidence of a man who believed every single syllable. The room was silent. I looked at him, and I stood up. I didn't shuffle, didn't wobble, didn't need assistance or support or a steadying hand. I stood from the chair where my son believed I would remain seated until someone lifted me, moved me, placed me somewhere I couldn't cause him inconvenience. I stood straight and steady and completely myself. The look on Desmond's face the exact moment he understood what he'd walked into was worth every second of the 8 weeks I'd spent pretending to be someone I wasn't. "Now," I said, my voice clear and strong and absolutely unwavering, "it's my turn." Gregory Marsh's briefcase slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Roxanne went pale. Norma Farrell's mouth fell open. Desmond just stared, and then I picked up the remote control and turned on the screen. I picked up the remote control with a hand that didn't shake. 30 years of teaching had taught me that the moment you reveal the truth is not the moment to show doubt, and I turned on the screen. The TV flashed to life. "This is the Apple Watch data from July 15th, I said, narrating as the first image appeared. A medical dashboard showing heart rate movement emergency alerts. 6:11 p.m. I collapsed in the kitchen. 6:13 abnormal heart rate detected 147 beats per minute. 6:17 automatic SOS transmitted to emergency services. 7:05 finally called by a human being. 54 minutes. Dr. Whitfield stood from his seat at the back. The medical timeline confirms oxygen deprivation occurred between 6:20 and 6:50 p.m. based on neurological markers documented at admission. The emergency call didn't come until 7:05. That window is medically and legally significant. I clicked to the next image. FaceTime carrier records. July 15th, 6:19 to 7:02 p.m. 43 minutes. A continuous video call between Roxanne's phone and a number registered to Norma Farrell. Norma went rigid in her chair. The screen changed again. Security footage from Broward Health Medical Center. Timestamp 7:18 p.m. The ambulance pulling into the emergency bay. And in the corner of the frame, clearly visible, Roxanne standing near the entrance phone to her ear, laughing. "Next," I said. The pawnshop footage appeared. Desmond at the counter handing over a small gold band accepting cash. July 19th, 4 days after I woke up in a hospital bed. My son sold his father's wedding ring, the ring that man wore for 32 years, for $340. I heard Roxanne's sharp intake of breath. Banking records. Valerie's spreadsheet filled the screen. Secondary debit card issued without authorization. $8,400 withdrawn in small increments over 6 months, all deposited into one account, Norma Farrell. Forensic handwritings analysis. The forged power of attorney appeared beside my actual signature. Red lines traced the completely wrong stroke mechanics, the backward pressure patterns, the amateur forgery. Not even close to my actual hand. And finally, the emails appeared. Subject lines clearly visible, nursing home inquiries, memory care placement, cost estimates, all dated April 3 months before I collapsed. Documentation of premeditation. One more thing, Valerie added. The property deed you borrowed in June, Desmond, for a bank comparison, you said. It was never returned to any bank. It went to a title company instead, attached to paperwork that would have started transferring ownership out of your mother's name. We have the intake form. The room fell into suffocating silence. Gregory Marsh stood up. He didn't object. He didn't argue. He didn't offer a single word of defense. He packed his briefcase with the mechanical precision of a man who'd just realized he was representing the indefensible, and he walked out of my house without saying goodbye to his client. Desmond's face had gone white. Roxanne stared at the floor. Norma Farrell sat frozen, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. "Mom," Desmond's voice cracked. "Mom, please, I was drowning. The debt, the pressure from work, I just wanted a better life for my family. I didn't mean for you to get hurt. I never wanted, please, I'm begging you, I'm sorry." I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. Old paper yellowed at the edges, my late husband's handwriting across the front in fading blue ink. "Your father left me this letter 7 years ago," I said. "Before the cancer took him. Before he lost the ability to speak. He wrote it knowing I'd need it someday." I unfolded the pages carefully, skipped to the final paragraph, and I read aloud. "If our son ever chooses money over you and Irene, I pray this never happens, but if it does, do not let maternal love blind you to what that choice means. That is no longer the boy we raised. That is a stranger living inside his skin. You do not owe love to a stranger who wears your child's face." I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the coffee table. The letter was 7 years old. My husband had been dead for 7 years, and he had known. He had seen what I refused to see, that the boy we raised had been replaced by someone who calculated worth in dollars instead of love. "Your father knew," I said quietly. "He saw it before I was willing to admit it. He tried to warn me." Florence Ingram stepped forward holding a folder. "I have a newly drafted will here, witnessed and notarized this morning." She placed it on the table in front of me. I picked up the pen, signed my name, my real signature with the correct stroke mechanics and decreasing pressure on every required line, in front of my son, in front of witnesses, in front of the truth. "My entire estate," I said, setting the pen down, "is now permanently willed to organizations supporting vulnerable seniors in Florida, elder abuse prevention programs, legal aid for financial exploitation victims. Not one penny goes to you, Desmond. Not the house, not the savings, not the life insurance, nothing." The wedding ring sat on the coffee table beside the signed will, the physical proof of what my son had been willing to sell. I looked at him one last time. "Today, you have received the exact consequence of the choice you made. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't create this outcome, Desmond. You did, 54 minutes at a time." Roxanne stood abruptly, pulling Norma with her. They left without speaking. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway. The front door opened and closed. Desmond sat alone in the chair where he'd arrived, confident and prepared, staring at the evidence still frozen on the TV screen. Florence began gathering documents. Dr. Whitfield stood to leave. Bernard touched my shoulder once as he passed silent support, no words needed. The truth had been spoken in a room full of witnesses, and for the first time since I collapsed on that kitchen floor, I could breathe without wondering if the people I loved were counting the days until I stopped. There was no mystery left unsolved, just a mother who had fought for her life and won. What came after wasn't drama, it was paperwork. Prosecutors and the slow machinery of justice doing what it does when someone finally gives it the truth. 3 months after the family meeting, the Florida State Attorney's Office had done what I could not do alone. They made my son and his wife understand that stealing from a vulnerable person carries consequences no amount of begging can erase. The paperwork took longer than the crime itself. Criminal complaints, evidence logs, forensic reports, Dr. Whitfield's medical testimony, Bernard's time-stamped photograph. Every piece of evidence I had gathered over 8 weeks was transformed into numbered exhibits cataloged by the state. Desmond and Roxanne Caldwell were formally charged in Broward County Circuit Court, criminal neglect of an elderly person, elder financial exploitation, aggravated forgery of legal documents. The charges stacked like building blocks, each one supported by evidence that couldn't be argued away. Norma Farrell faced her own reckoning conspiracy to commit elder abuse and federal wire fraud charges. The banking records told a story she could not rewrite. The prosecutor, Rachel Hartley, called me in December with an update. Roxanne took a deal, she said matter-of-fact. To get it, she had to testify against her own mother. Full cooperation. Complete disclosure. I felt nothing when she told me. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the quiet certainty that some betrayals circle back on themselves. And Desmond, I asked. No deal. Trial scheduled for March. Will I have to testify? No. Her voice softened slightly. The Apple Watch data is unimpeachable. The FaceTime records prove the timeline. The security footage, the bank statements, the forged documents, everything speaks for itself. I thought about that afterward, how a small device on my wrist had been a better witness than I ever could have been. The forged power of attorney was legally voided. The guardianship petition was dismissed with prejudice, meaning Desmond could never file again. My accounts were fully restored. The stolen funds were clawed back from Norma's account, plus penalties and interest. People asked whether I wanted to see Desmond, whether I wanted to hear him apologize in person. My answer was not never. It was not yet, and perhaps not ever. Justice is not dramatic. It doesn't arrive in one explosive moment with music swelling in the background. Justice is paperwork and court dates and prosecutors reading evidence into the record while defendants sit silent. But it is still justice, and it still matters. In January, I sold the house, the Coral Springs home where I had lived for 35 years, raised Desmond, and watched my husband die. It sold in 3 weeks, cash, to a young family with 2 children and a golden retriever. I signed the closing papers without crying. That house had stopped being home the moment I lay on its kitchen floor and understood what had been planned within its walls. The proceeds went exactly where my new will specified: organizations supporting vulnerable seniors across Florida, elder abuse prevention programs, legal aid funds, housing assistance for older adults escaping financial exploitation. I moved to a smaller place, 1 story, bright windows, a kitchen just large enough for one person who likes to cook. Bernard came by the first afternoon holding a potted succulent as a housewarming gift. "It suits you, Irene," he said. "Feels like a fresh start." "It is," I agreed. I told him I was going to plant sunflowers in that small garden patch in March. No vegetables, no practicality, just something beautiful to look at while I drink my morning coffee. "Your husband would have liked that," Bernard said. He would have. After he left, I sat on the porch as the sun set. The Apple Watch vibrated gently on my wrist, a reminder to stand and move. I glanced at the screen. Resting heart rate 72 beats per minute. Normal. Perfectly, beautifully, unremarkably normal. For the first time in months, my heart was exactly where it should be. And that small garden patch was waiting, patient and ready for March. Task 7.1. This morning, I woke up in a house where no one is counting my medication, tracking my movements, or calculating how many years I have left. I made coffee exactly the way I like it, strong and black, because I am the only person I need to please. The kitchen is smaller than the one I left behind. The counter space is limited. The cabinets are plain white instead of the oak I chose 30 years ago. But when I reach for the coffee filters, they are exactly where I put them yesterday. When I measure the grounds, 4 scoops, not 3, no one suggests I'm making it too strong, or reminds me that caffeine isn't good for my blood pressure. I make it the way I want. I drink it the way I like. And for the first time in years, that small choice feels like freedom. Steam rises from the coffee maker, carrying the smell of dark roast through the quiet room. I lean against the counter and watch a small bird perched on a bare branch outside a branch on the tree Bernard helped me plant last week. I don't know what species it is. I have all the time in the world now to learn. The wedding ring sits on the counter beside the coffee maker. Not hidden, not locked away, not sold to a pawn shop for $340. Right there where I see it every single morning. Some people might think I keep it as a memorial. Others might assume it's a trophy proof that I won. They would both be wrong. I keep it because I am a teacher. 30 years in a classroom taught me that the best lessons are the ones you revisit every day. The ring reminds me that some choices reveal who people truly are, and once made, they can never be unmade. My son chose to sell his father's memory. That truth is fixed. I don't need to be angry anymore. I just need to remember. You might think I would be lonely here. You would be wrong. Loneliness is sitting in a room full of people who are mentally calculating your net worth. Loneliness is performing competence for an audience that wants you to fail. Loneliness is lying on a kitchen floor for 54 minutes, while someone walks past you to check their phone. This is not loneliness. This is peace. My Apple Watch vibrates. 8 a.m. Medication reminder. I walk to the counter, pick up the small orange pill bottle, and take my dose. The bottle sits exactly where I placed it yesterday. No one moved it. No one hid it to manufacture evidence of my confusion. Small thing, profound thing. The difference between forgetting where you put something and someone deliberately hiding it from you is the difference between aging and being victimized. I know that difference now. I no longer prepare elaborate dinners that feel like inspections. I no longer rehearse answers to questions designed to prove I am declining. I no longer perform cheerfulness for people who were hoping to see its opposite. For 8 weeks, I performed dementia. I feigned confusion. I let my son believe he had won. That performance gave me everything: the returned funds, the house sold on my own terms, the charges filed, the consequences delivered. But the real victory was simpler. The freedom to be exactly who I am without pretending to be less capable, less aware, or less sharp than I actually am. The freedom to just exist as myself without performance, without fear. The coffee is hot and bitter and perfect. The morning sun warms the counter where the ring sits. The bird outside sings a 3-note call I don't recognize yet, but I will learn it. My husband would be proud, not because I won, because I survived, because I chose to keep living. The sunflowers will bloom in March. And to you listening to my story, remember this: sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from. I spent 35 years raising a son I thought I knew. I taught him right from wrong, compassion over greed, family over money. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing who he'd actually become. Don't make my mistake. Don't let love blind you to the truth standing right in front of you. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. This isn't just another revenge story with mom getting even. It's about knowing your worth when family forgets it. Family revenge stories like mine happen more than you think, but what matters is whether you fight or fade. I believe God gave me those 8 weeks to teach me patience and strategy. The Apple Watch recorded 54 minutes, but what I learned will last forever. Trust yourself, document everything, and never apologize for defending your dignity. If this story resonated with you, please drop a comment below. What would you have done in my position? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more family revenge stories and revenge stories with mom who refused to give up, subscribe to Silent Revenge with Phoenix. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. I appreciate you being here with me. Remember, while this story contains fictionalized elements for narrative impact, the message about standing up for yourself is real and important.